Hey, welcome back. Today we're taking a closer look at a story featured on the front page of Seoul Economic Daily.
We have a lot of ground to cover today.
We do. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore how the ripple effects of global geopolitical tensions, specifically the conflict between the U.S. and Iran, are actively reshaping South Korea's energy consumption, industrial supply chains, and, national security strategies for you, the listener.
Right, the very clear chain of events. A standoff in the Middle East is creating, immediate, tangible changes on the streets of Seoul and inside major industrial plants.
Let's start with those streets. If folks have walked through Gangnam lately, those massive high-definition outdoor
Oh,
billboards,
yeah, you can't miss them.
they're visually impressive, but there's a serious energy cost associated with them, right?
There is. According to the data, the free display zones in Seoul, which include areas like Coex and Gwanghwamun, consume about 1.16 million kilowatt hours monthly.
Wow, that sounds like a massive amount of power.
It really is.
Yeah.
Put that into perspective, that equals the power used by 4,000 average households.
Wait, really?
Yeah, and Gangnam's ads alone use 358,960 kilowatt hours. That's equivalent to 1,200 households.
That is a substantial amount of electricity just for advertising, especially during a global energy constraint. It feels a bit like running the air conditioning with the windows open during a heat wave. You're using premium energy for aesthetics while the grid is under pressure.
Exactly. That's why Sungkong University professor Song Du-sam is suggesting policy interventions. He recommends implementing an electricity quota system, along with corporate incentives.
Okay, so a way to systematically manage that demand.
Right. But, if a conflict in the Middle East is squeezing the local power grid, the situation is even more complex for heavy industry.
Because they rely on raw materials from that region. Like the blockade at the Hormuz Strait has created a very real shortage of naphtha.
Yes, it has. South Korea relies on imports for 45% of its naphtha demand, and 77% of those imports come directly from the Middle East.
Wait, for listeners who might not be familiar with industrial chemicals, why is naphtha so critical to the economy?
Well, it's often referred to as the rice of industry.
The rice of industry.
Yeah, it's the foundational building block for basic plastics, but also for the advanced components used in semiconductors and automobiles.
Yeah.
Without it, production lines basically just halt.
So if 77% of that imported naphtha is suddenly delayed or cut off, how are companies adapting? They can't just sit around and wait for ships to arrive.
No, they have to make operational shifts. For example, Lotte Chemical is shutting down its Yeosu plant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they are moving their scheduled maintenance up by 3 weeks, which temporarily removes 1.23 million tons of annual ethylene capacity from the market.
Ah, that makes sense. If you don't have the feedstock to run the plant anyway, you might as well use that forced downtime to do your required maintenance.
Precisely. It's a strategic response to a physical bottleneck. But while chemical companies adjust their schedules to survive physical shortages, other sectors are getting, a lot more creative with their assets.
Right, like LS Cable and System. They are taking a completely different approach.
They're turning to digital finance.
Yeah, they plan to issue security token offerings, or STOs, for over 1 trillion won in raw material assets. This includes 99.95% pure copper and rare earths.
Which are essential for AI and electric vehicles. The mechanics of this are quite notable.
How so?
Well, under the revised Electronic Securities Act taking effect next February, LS Cable can treat physical copper sitting in a warehouse like tradable stock.
So basically, instead of having capital locked up in physical stockpiles, they are transforming those physical materials into liquid financial instruments.
Exactly. It allows the company to quickly raise capital for new facilities without taking on traditional debt.
They bypass the physical supply chain shock by financializing the assets they already hold.
It's a structural shift in how we view industrial assets.
Yeah.
And really, this vulnerability in our economic supply chains, whether it's municipal electricity or copper points, directly to a broader issue of national security.
They are deeply connected. A nation's security relies entirely on its resource independence and its ability to protect those supply lines.
Which brings us to President Lee Jae-myung's recent West Sea Defense Day speech.
Right. He emphasized the stance that peace is the best security, but paired that philosophy with some very specific structural reforms.
Yes, the administration is pushing for an early operational control, or OPCAD transfer. Alongside that, they are moving toward a selective volunteer military system.
But how does changing the military structure help with these global resource constraints?
It's about adaptability. As global environments become more complex, like we're seeing with disrupted shipping lanes, the military needs to be modernized and specialized.
Right, the old systems might not work as well.
Exactly. A selective volunteer system aims to create a more professionalized force capable of securing these extended, vulnerable supply chains rather than relying solely on a traditional conscript model.
So securing the economic supply chain through financial innovation and modernizing the defense structure are essentially parallel responses to the exact same geopolitical pressure.
They are. Which leaves us with a compelling question. If physical supply chains are so easily disrupted by distant conflicts, how might the tokenization of raw materials fundamentally change how nations stockpile and trade strategic assets in the future?
That's all for today's deep dive. We'll be back with more insights. You've been listening to the Korea Economy Brief, straight from the front page of Seoul Economic Daily. Thanks for tuning in.